this thought this afternoon. Encouragement for the persecuted.
All right.
Encouragement for the persecuted. There is no doubt that this is one of those letters, or as some scholars would call it, one of the epistles written by Paul to the church in Thessalonica. And there's no doubt, because the tone of it would suggest that these individuals in the first century have been experiencing some difficult days.
All right.
Life hasn't been that easy. It's not one of those times when you can just sail through life and know that all is well. As a matter of fact, in the first century, these individuals are having extremely difficult times.
Yeah.
If you've ever done any reading of Paul's literature, you can't help but notice that he has a tendency, on the one hand, to once again try to reaffirm who he is, what he believes, what he does, and at the same time tries to commend individuals for the work that they have done, and then sooner or later winds up spanking their butt. He's an encourager because he recognizes that there are times in the life of people who are following Christ when all appears to be well, but at the same time, there's times in their lives when it is a challenging event. Imagine just for a moment, Paul is writing a letter trying to encourage these young fellows that he has placed over the churches in Asia Minor. He has placed them strategically in places like Ephesus and Thessalonica, and has placed them in places surrounding Asia Minor. You would think that things would be well as they move strategically towards the church in Corinth, and Paul would be celebrating, but that's not always what happens. It's the same way in the modern day church. You would assume that because individuals have been called by God and designated to lead churches and to encourage people, that things would be well and it would be a joyful time. But the truth of the matter is that so often, rather than having our egos stroked, instead of being lifted up and celebrated as individuals who are leading the people of God, we are sometimes persecuted. And so when reading the literature that has gone out, and as Paul attempts to encourage young Timothy and Titus, they discover very quickly that these places that God has placed them over is not a bed of ease. And Pastor, I pastored for some 36 years of my life, 24 years at Second Baptist and 12 years prior to that. And not all 36 of those years have been years that were filled with joy and happiness. Some of those days were filled with persecution. Some of those days were filled with agony and points that were more difficult than pleasing. And so we stopped by today because we want to at least show to the cleric here at this church that God is showing his appreciation even when you've gone through persecution.
Yeah. All right.
Is there anybody in the house that even though you've given your best to God, you still recognize that life is sometimes unkind?
All right.
All right.
Paul is suggesting here to these followers that he indeed has been doing the best that he possibly could to celebrate God, and still yet there are people who dislike what he's attempting to do. Just in case you are not privy to some of the information that Scripture has or theologians have recorded for us, you can't help but know that there were times in Paul's life, even after he had found himself on the Damascus road, after God had picked him up and strategically wiped the scales from his eyes so that he could somehow see the direction that God had him going in, there were still people who did not want him to succeed at what God was calling him to do. This is the same individual who at one time had received papers from the authorities so that somehow he could stop the people of the way, to keep them from going in the direction that God would have them go in. You see, somehow there are people surrounding us, people before us, people beside us, people behind us who are not so happy about your success or about you succeeding at what God has called you to do. And so I stopped by to serve notice that even when it doesn't go well with us, even when it is difficult, God is still saying to us, I appreciate what you are doing.
All right.
And so I was watching the text carefully, reading some points of it, understanding that these individuals are challenged.
That's right.
These individuals are experiencing difficult days. Paul is warning them in advance. It's not all going to be easy. And somehow, somewhere along the way, many of us have informed people who come into the church that life is going to be absolutely free of challenges. We may not have openly said that, but we've practiced it in so many ways. We've given them a disillusion to thinking that if you just join church and sit on the pews and pay your dues, as we call them, or give your tithes, that life is going to be easy. I stopped by to serve notice to all of us, even when you've done your best.
That's right.
It is still going to be challenging and difficult when you've tied 20%. Life will still serve up for you a table or a plate that is challenging for you. Even when you've given God your 10% of your time, the devil will not stop challenging you and coming after you. He still wants you. So Paul is writing this letter so that somehow these individuals who are struggling, these individuals who are challenged with these perils, recognize that God has not left them alone. And that's the same thing that he wants you to know today, that God has not deserted you. It may be difficult. There may be individuals who are going through challenging days, but God has not turned his back on you. The people in Puerto Rico, the well over 3 million people who are going through challenging moments, God has not left them. The individuals who are in Korea, those who are in Mexico, those who are in Houston, in Texas, God hasn't deserted them. These are merely signs of the time that God is winding things up because he's on his way back. And so with all of the persecution that we are experiencing, God is serving us notice that he's going to be with us in the midst of everything that we're going through. So it doesn't always feel like God is with us.
That's right.
There's been times in my personal life when I've had to ask God and myself, where are you? And don't look at me like you that holy. You've asked God, where was he some days too? When somebody that meant so much to you and you loved them dearly, and all of a sudden they have exited the scene, and you thought they would be there for you all of your life. You thought that that support would be there for you, and they are no longer there. You thought that you would be able to work out the rest of your days on a job that you were happy with, but something transpired along the way, and all of a sudden that revenue that you once had, you no longer have. You thought you were going to make it, and you started asking God, God, where were you when these folk were manipulating situations to bring my life down? What were you doing, God? You have to ask yourself, God, where are you now?
Come on.
All right, that's right.
So if we are honest and real with ourselves, we ask ourselves, God, where are you? Can you show up because I'm hurting? God, where are you when I'm lonely? Where are you when I need you? God, I need you right here in the context of this dilemma. Now maybe this is just a Smith thing, but when there are individuals who mean a great deal to me and they exit, I need to know from God, God, are you going to replace them with somebody that is stronger, somebody that is closer, somebody that can help me a little better? When the finances is no longer there and I don't know how I'm going to make it, God, will you just show up and shower me with some blessings because I don't know how I'm going to get through it. And maybe some of you sitting there are always positive when you look at God. You're always thinking that God's going to make it. I'm not quite that positive all the time. But I just need to know that God loves me enough to show up in the midst of my challenge.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so God gives to Timothy and to Titus the reassuring that when you go through these challenges, you might feel like giving up, but hold on. You might feel like you can't make it, but hold your head up.
That's right.
Or you might feel like you've become so downtrodden that your heart is breaking and the world is just crashing down on you. But I dare you to look up. You might feel like everything is just about to collapse on you, but God said if you can just hold on a little while longer, well, I'm going to celebrate with you in the midst of your challenges. Is there anybody in the house this afternoon that you've gone through something? You're dealing with something right now, but you dare not tell anybody else about. There's some stuff that's crashing in on you. You're not sure if God is conscious of it, but you need to know that God is right there with you.
Oh, yes.
Yes, preach it.
And so the message becomes not just for the preacher. And by the way, all of you are ministers. You minister to somebody, whether or not you know it. It might be negative, it might be positive, but you are ministering to somebody.
Oh, yes.
And so this afternoon, as we come together to celebrate, we recognize that we're going to go through some stuff. You're going to be persecuted. And it's not always going to be external. You missed that. Sometimes the challenges that you face will not be outside the church.
Right.
All right.
That's right.
Sometimes the challenges that you face will be inside the church.
I know that's
Come
right.
on, talk to me for
I
a
know
moment.
that's right.
Oh, yes.
Sometimes the challenges that you face, the persecution that you're going through, won't be external outside the house. Some of it will be within your own home. Come on. And some of that stuff that you are going to have to endure won't be outside of you. Some of it is your own mess. I know that you want to lay claims that it's somebody else's fault and it's their reason why you're going through, but the truth of the matter is some of that stuff you brought upon you.
Oh, yeah.
Tell it.
Am I talking to anybody?
Oh, you are.
Now, I know you walk around on Sunday holy,
No, do
and you assume that nobody else knows, and even if they don't know, you know. And so as long as you know it, it cripples you because you're carrying that baggage around with you. You can't get rid of it because it's in you. You know about it. You carried it with you. And therefore, God is saying all of the challenges that you face is not something somebody else put on you. You brought the baggage with you.
Preach it. Tell it.
And so when Paul writes this letter to the church at Thessalonica, he's assuming that everything's going to be well. But he receives a letter. And the letter comes back suggesting to him, Paul, you need to get here quick. Because everything that you thought was good in the church here at Thessalonica is not quite like you thought.
All right.
And so he begins to recognize that the challenges are not by the naysayers outside the church.
Come on down.
All right.
It's not about those who are scuttlebugging the information outside the church because it can't get out till you take it.
Yeah. Right.
Now, nobody knows the business about your church until you take it outside of your church. They don't know about your finances. They don't know about the situation in the church until you take it outside of the church. One thing that we always teach our children, and that is, whatever happens in this house, right here,
house.
Right here in this house. You know, just like they said about Vegas when you went to, oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to skip that
All right,
for me. When some of you went to Vegas, and they said, what happens? Yeah.
Sound like y'all been to Vegas.
The non-believers wouldn't look so negatively at our churches if we weren't so busy taking so much of our stuff inside of our churches, outside of our churches. They wouldn't know what's going on in our church if we weren't taking it outside of our church.
Tell it.
And so they are watching us and listening to us, engaging what we are doing and assessing us, because ultimately we are busy taking our stuff outside. Paul says, you know what? I need to deal with some stuff here. I need to make some changes. So that's the reason why he sent Titus and Timothy down there to make sure that things were taken care of. Now imagine, this is Saul. Saul is encouraging people who are being persecuted. You see, you really can't help folk technically until you've been through what they've been through.
Tell it.
right.
And so Paul is taking time to encourage the folks at Thessalonica because he's been where some of them are. You can't be as sympathetic with me about certain situations until you've been through those situations.
All right.
I can't sympathize with a pastor in certain situations unless I've been through those same situations that pastor has been through.
Right.
Am I talking to anybody?
Yes.
I can't sympathize with those of you who have gone through some stuff in the choir because I'm not a choir member.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
I do know the dynamics of dealing with people are difficult. Because anytime you get more than two of us together,
Yeah. Yeah.
it only takes two of us. And sometimes I can't agree with me.
Right.
Come on, don't look at me like that. Sometimes you can't agree with you either.
Right. Right.
Tell it.
And so when we get two or three together, then all of a sudden you got individuals that are wrestling with issues. Now, Lord, help us when we get to the 12. Because Jesus had picked 12.
Yes, he did. That's right.
And Peter was noted for cussing and cutting.
Tell it.
Thomas Didymus was known to be a doubter.
Yeah.
Matthew was a tax collector. And the others were so uninterested in the text, they don't even bother to tell you what they did. But you know as well as I do, all of them represent some segment of our life. There are times in your life when you were a cusser. And a cutter. Some of us are still in the church and we could be called Mr. or Mrs. Didymus. We are still doubting the possibility that God can do what God says he can do. But Paul says, I've been shipwrecked more than once.
Go on, Brother Smith.
I've been jailed more than once. I've been beaten 40 times, save one more than once.
Yeah.
Paul says, I've been maligned, my character has been questioned, people are asking about the authenticity as to whether or not I'm an apostle. I stopped by to serve notice to somebody today that God is showing his appreciation for those of you who've been persecuted. And life will persecute you. So God wants you to know today that whatever position you serve in the church, Whenever you are being persecuted within and without, know this, that God has already prepared a reward just for you. And I don't know if you've read your scriptures, but somewhere over there toward the end of your canon, in that book called the Apocalypse or Revelation, there is a suggestion in it that when we get to glory, there is a crown that's reserved for us. Now that's good news for me. Because all that I've been through, all that I've had to endure, is good news to know that when it's all said and done, God has a crown, a ring, and some new shoes.
Oh, yeah. Woo! Yeah.
God is saying, I appreciate everything you've done. And to show my appreciation to those of you who've been persecuted, I got a robe for you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know that there's a robe for you, right? You can't fit mine. Mine's a 44 red. You can't fit my robe. There's a ring that's been prepared for Smith. You can't fit my ring. It's a 10 and a half. It's just for me. It's got my name in it. He's got a crown for me. He's got it sized up. It's just right. I know my head looks large, but it's just a medium. He's got shoes designed for me so that I can walk on the streets that appear to be paved with gold. I wear a size 10. You can't wear my shoes.
All right.
And so as we celebrate and appreciate what God has done, He already has it mapped out just for us. That's good news today. Pastor Anderson, know this. God appreciates what you're doing, even though you've been persecuted. Come on, stand with me today. Bless you, Pastor.